The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the ornate gates, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood General Viktor Petrov, a high-ranking military officer from a small Eastern European nation, his chest decorated with numerous medals and ribbons that caught the sunlight. His uniform was pristine, his posture rigid, and his expression carried the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to absolute authority. General Petrov had arrived in London 3 days earlier as part of a diplomatic mission, but his true purpose extended far beyond official negotiations. He harbored deep resentment toward the British monarchy and what he perceived as their outdated traditions. In his homeland, he commanded thousands of soldiers who would snap to attention at his mere presence, saluting with military precision whenever he passed. The idea that these ceremonial guards might not acknowledge his rank gnawed at his pride like a persistent itch. As he watched the Queen's Guard take their positions, Petrov's jaw tightened with disdain. These soldiers, with their tall black bearskin hats and bright red tunics, seemed more like museum pieces than real warriors to him. Their weapons appeared ceremonial, their movements choreographed rather than tactical. In his mind, they represented everything weak about Western military traditions. All show and no substance. The crowd around him murmured with excitement as the guards began their ritual. But Petrov saw only an opportunity to prove his superiority. He had spent years building his reputation as a feared military leader, someone who demanded respect through intimidation and force. The thought of these British soldiers treating him as just another tourist was intolerable to his inflated ego. Standing near the palace gates, Petrov began to formulate a plan that would satisfy his need for recognition and simultaneously humiliate what he considered to be inferior soldiers. He observed their patterns, noting how they maintained their stoic expressions despite the constant chatter and camera flashes from tourists. Their discipline was evident, but Petrov interpreted it as weakness rather than strength. His translator, a nervous young diplomat named Marcus, stood quietly beside him, occasionally glancing at the general's increasingly hostile expression. Marcus had worked with foreign dignitaries before, but something about Petrov's demeanor made him uneasy. The general's reputation for explosive temper and unpredictable behavior had preceded him to London, and Marcus hoped this official visit would conclude without incident. As the ceremony continued, Petrov's irritation grew more pronounced. Several tourists had attempted to interact with the guards only to be met with complete silence and unwavering focus. The guards' commitment to their duty impressed the onlookers, but it only fueled Petrov's determination to force them into acknowledging his authority. He began to see this as more than just a personal slight. It became a matter of national pride and military honor. In his twisted perspective, the general's fingers drummed impatiently against his ceremonial sword hilt as he watched Guard James Morrison take his position near the palace entrance. Morrison, a seasoned soldier with 8 years of service, maintained perfect posture despite the growing crowd and increasingly warm morning sun. His experience had taught him to focus completely on his duty, filtering out all distractions while remaining alert to genuine security threats. Petrov studied Morrison intently, noting the guard's disciplined bearing and professional appearance. This particular soldier would become the target of his planned confrontation, though Morrison remained completely unaware of the brewing storm. The general's mind raced with scenarios, each more dramatic than the last, as he imagined forcing these British soldiers to recognize his superior rank and authority. As the morning progressed, more tourists arrived, creating a larger audience for what Petrov envisioned as his moment of triumph. He straightened his uniform, adjusted his medals, and prepared to make his move. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the resolve of both men and ultimately reveal the true meaning of honor, duty, and respect in ways neither could have anticipated. Roti kha lo jaake tua.
Roti ka lo!
Throughout the entire ordeal, Guard James Morrison demonstrated the true meaning of professional discipline and unwavering commitment to duty. His mental training kicked in as he employed techniques learned during years of service to maintain his composure. Despite the chaos erupting around him, he focused on his breathing, keeping it slow and steady, while his mind remained alert to any genuine security threats that might emerge from the increasingly volatile situation. Morrison's thoughts briefly wandered to his family back home, his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, who were undoubtedly proud of their father's service to the crown. He remembered the day he had taken his oath as a member of the Queen's Guard, promising to uphold the honor and traditions of the regiment regardless of personal cost or discomfort. That oath meant everything to him, and no amount of shouting or intimidation from a foreign dignitary would make him abandon his sacred duty. The Guard's training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, though perhaps not with such theatrical intensity. During his preparation for ceremonial duties, instructors had emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity and composure in the face of provocation. They had shared stories of guards who had remained motionless while tourists tried everything from silly faces to outright harassment, always emphasizing that the uniform represented something greater than any individual wearing it. As Petrov's rants continued to echo around the courtyard, Morrison found himself analyzing the general's behavior with the detached professionalism of a seasoned soldier. He recognized the signs of someone who had never been genuinely challenged or told no in their entire career. The general's reaction suggested a man who had built his authority on fear and intimidation rather than earned respect and competent leadership. Other members of the Queen's Guard, stationed around the palace grounds, watched their colleague with silent pride and solidarity. They understood the pressure Morrison was under and admired his textbook perfect response to an increasingly absurd situation. None of them showed any outward sign of awareness, but they were all prepared to act if the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation into actual physical threat. Morrison's peripheral vision caught sight of the growing crowd and the forest of smartphones pointed in his direction. He understood that his response to this challenge would likely be seen by thousands, perhaps millions of people around the world. This knowledge only strengthened his resolve to represent his regiment and his country with the utmost professionalism and dignity. Every second of his perfect stillness was a testament to British military tradition and discipline. The Guard's mind remained sharp and focused, despite the sensory assault of Petrov's continued shouting. He mentally reviewed protocol for various scenarios, ensuring he was prepared for any escalation while maintaining his current stance unless absolutely necessary. His weapon remained properly positioned, his uniform remained immaculate, and his bearing continued to exemplify everything the Queen's Guard represented to the world. Years of military service had taught Morrison to distinguish between real authority and empty bluster. He had served under officers who commanded genuine respect through their competence, courage, and care for their subordinates. The contrast between those leaders and the ranting figure before him could not have been more stark. True military leadership earned respect through actions and character, not through loud demands and theatrical displays. The Guard's resolve was strengthened by his understanding of what the Queen's Guard symbolized to millions of people around the world. They represented continuity, tradition, and unwavering dedication to duty in an uncertain world. Tourists traveled thousands of miles to witness their ceremony and discipline, and Morrison was determined not to disappoint those who looked to the Guard as an example of British values and military excellence. As the confrontation stretched on, Morrison's commitment never wavered. His legs remained steady despite the prolonged standing, his expression remained neutral despite the verbal assault, and his focus remained sharp despite the growing chaos around him. He embodied the very best qualities of military service: selfless dedication, unshakable discipline, and quiet courage in the face of adversity. The Guard's perfect response to Petrov's demands was itself a form of victory that the general was too blinded by rage to recognize. Morrison's silence spoke louder than any words could have, demonstrating that true strength comes from self-control and adherence to principle rather than from intimidation and bluster. His unwavering stance became a masterclass in dignity under pressure, watched and admired by growing numbers of observers who recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. Chief Inspector William Hayes emerged from the palace gates with the measured stride of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. His 25 years of experience in palace security had exposed him to every conceivable type of incident, from genuine security threats to diplomatic complications, but the scene unfolding before him presented unique challenges. The combination of a foreign military officer, growing international media attention, and potential diplomatic consequences required careful navigation. Hayes approached the situation with two plainclothes security officers flanking him at a respectful distance. Their presence was meant to be reassuring rather than threatening, though their professional bearing made it clear they were prepared for any escalation. The chief inspector's calm demeanor provided a stark contrast to Petrov's continued agitation, and his arrival seemed to shift the energy of the entire courtyard. The crowd of tourists had grown to over 200 people, creating a significant security concern beyond the immediate confrontation. Hayes quickly assessed the situation, noting the cameras, the social media activity, and the potential for crowd control issues. His primary concern was ensuring public safety, while resolving the diplomatic incident in a way that would minimize embarrassment for all parties involved. Approaching General Petrov with diplomatic courtesy, Hayes introduced himself in a voice that carried authority without aggression. His tone was respectful but firm as he explained the protocols governing interactions with the Queen's Guard and offered to discuss the general's concerns through proper diplomatic channels. The chief inspector's approach was designed to provide Petrov with an honorable way to withdraw from the confrontation while maintaining his dignity. However, Petrov's response to the security intervention was to double down on his demands with even greater intensity. He began shouting about international military courtesy, diplomatic immunity, and what he perceived as deliberate insults to his rank and nationality. His behavior had crossed the line from inappropriate to genuinely concerning, as his gestures became more aggressive and his demands more irrational. Marcus, the translator, seized the opportunity to approach Chief Inspector Hayes with visible relief. In hushed tones, he explained the general's background, his volatile temperament, and his apparent fixation on receiving salutes from foreign military personnel. Marcus also expressed his own concerns about potential diplomatic fallout and begged for assistance in resolving the situation before it caused serious international complications. Hayes listened carefully to Marcus's explanation while keeping one eye on Petrov's increasingly erratic behavior. The chief inspector's experience told him that this was more than just cultural misunderstanding or wounded pride. The general's reactions suggested deeper psychological issues related to authority and control. This recognition influenced his approach to de-escalation. As he realized traditional diplomatic courtesy might not be sufficient, the security team quietly established a perimeter around the confrontation, gently encouraging tourists to maintain a safe distance while ensuring the area remained accessible for normal palace operations. Their movements were subtle and professional, designed to manage the crowd without creating additional drama or appearing heavy-handed to the international audience now watching through social media. Meanwhile, inside the palace, urgent communications were taking place between security personnel, diplomatic staff, and government officials. The incident was being monitored at the highest levels, with concerns about potential impact on bilateral relations and the general's country's ongoing diplomatic negotiations with Britain. Phone calls were made to the Foreign Office, and contingency plans were developed for various escalation scenarios. Hayes attempted several de-escalation strategies, from offering private meetings to discussing proper diplomatic procedures for addressing grievances. Each attempt was met with increased hostility from Petrov, who seemed incapable of accepting any solution that didn't involve Morrison saluting him in front of the gathered crowd. The general's fixation on this specific outcome made compromise increasingly difficult. The chief inspector's patience and professionalism stood in sharp contrast to Petrov's deteriorating behavior. Hayes represented the best of British diplomatic tradition, calm under pressure, respectful of all parties, and focused on finding solutions rather than assigning blame. His handling of the situation became its own demonstration of how true authority operates through competence and restraint rather than bluster and intimidation. As the standoff continued, Hayes made the difficult decision to escalate security protocols while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Additional personnel were positioned strategically around the area. Communication channels were opened with medical and diplomatic support teams, and preparations were made for various contingencies, including the possibility that Petrov might need to be removed from the premises for everyone's safety. The chief inspector's greatest challenge was balancing multiple, competing priorities on protecting the dignity of the Queen's Guard, ensuring public safety, minimizing diplomatic damage, and providing General Petrov with options that might allow him to preserve some measure of face. It was a delicate dance that required all of his experience and skill, performed in front of an ever-growing international audience that was documenting every moment for posterity. News of the confrontation spread across global media networks with unprecedented speed, transforming a local incident into an international embarrassment that would have lasting diplomatic repercussions. Major news outlets picked up the story, within hours, with headlines ranging from "Foreign General's Meltdown at Buckingham Palace" to "Diplomatic Incident Unfolds as Military Officer Demands Salute from Queen's Guard." The viral videos garnered millions of views across various social media platforms, making General Petrov an unwilling internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. Back in Petrov's home country, government officials watched the unfolding disaster. With growing horror and immediate damage control efforts, emergency meetings were called at the highest levels of government as diplomats scrambled to distance their nation from the general's behavior while attempting to minimize the impact on ongoing international relationships. The Foreign Ministry issued carefully worded statements expressing regret for the incident, while emphasizing that Petrov's actions did not represent official policy or approved diplomatic conduct. Television news programs around the world featured analysis from military experts, diplomatic specialists, and international relations scholars who dissected every aspect of the confrontation. The consensus was overwhelmingly critical of Petrov's behavior, with many commentators using the incident as an example of how not to conduct international diplomacy. The Queen's Guard received universal praise for their professionalism and restraint in the face of unprecedented provocation. Social media platforms exploded with commentary, memes, and parodies related to the incident. Users created hashtags that trended globally, shared edited videos with humorous soundtracks, and posted analysis of the confrontation from every conceivable angle. The story became a cultural phenomenon that transcended its diplomatic origins, entering popular culture as a symbol of entitled behavior, meeting immovable professionalism. Within Petrov's own military hierarchy, the reaction was swift and severe. Senior commanders who had tolerated his authoritarian style and explosive temper for years suddenly found his behavior indefensible when displayed on the international stage. Whispered conversations in military corridors spoke of immediate investigations, potential court-martial proceedings, and the likelihood that Petrov's career was effectively over, regardless of any official punishment. The diplomatic mission that had brought Petrov to London was quietly suspended as his government worked to contain the fallout from his public meltdown. Trade negotiations that had been progressing smoothly were suddenly complicated by questions about the reliability and professionalism of the country's leadership. International partners began expressing concerns about doing business with a nation whose military officers could display such poor judgment and lack of self-control. British diplomatic officials found themselves in the unusual position of being praised internationally for their handling of the situation, while simultaneously having to manage the delicate task of maintaining relationships with Petrov's home country. The incident had created an opportunity to demonstrate British values and professionalism, but it also required careful navigation to avoid unnecessarily humiliating a foreign nation beyond what had already occurred. Academic institutions began incorporating the incident into their curriculum as a case study in diplomatic protocol, crisis management, and cross-cultural military traditions. Business schools analyzed the situation as an example of how individual behavior can impact organizational reputation, while military academies used it to illustrate the importance of discipline and proper conduct in international settings. The tourism industry around Buckingham Palace experienced an unexpected boost as visitors flocked to see the location where the famous confrontation had taken place. Tour guides began incorporating the story into their narratives, and souvenir shops reported increased sales of Queen's Guard memorabilia. The incident had inadvertently become a marketing success for British tourism, though at considerable cost to international diplomatic relationships. Intelligence agencies in multiple countries quietly updated their psychological profiles of General Petrov, noting his inability to handle public rejection of his authority and his tendency toward irrational behavior under stress. This information would prove valuable in future diplomatic and military interactions, as other nations now understood the potential risks of engaging with someone whose emotional control was so obviously compromised. The incident triggered broader discussions about military protocol, diplomatic immunity, and the appropriate behavior of visiting officials in foreign countries. International law experts debated the boundaries of diplomatic privilege and the responsibilities that come with representing one's nation abroad. The confrontation had raised questions that extended far beyond the specific personalities involved. As days passed, the story evolved from breaking news to cultural phenomenon to historical footnote, but its impact on the individuals involved remained profound and lasting. Petrov's name became synonymous with diplomatic failure and poor judgment, while Guard Morrison was celebrated as a symbol of duty and professionalism. The incident served as a stark reminder that in the modern world, every action by public figures is subject to immediate global scrutiny and judgment. 3 months after the incident, the consequences of General Petrov's public meltdown had crystallized into a devastating series of personal and professional losses that would define the remainder of his life. His military career, built over decades of service and advancement, came to an abrupt end when his government quietly forced his retirement with minimal pension benefits. The official reason cited conduct unbecoming an officer and detrimental to national interests, but everyone understood the real cause was his humiliating breakdown at Buckingham Palace. Petrov's fall from grace was swift and merciless. The same subordinates who had once saluted him with fearful respect now whispered jokes about his failed confrontation with the immovable British Guard. His reputation as a feared military leader evaporated overnight, replaced by mockery and embarrassment that followed him wherever he went. Former colleagues crossed streets to avoid encountering him, unwilling to be associated with someone who had become a symbol of military incompetence and diplomatic failure. The general's personal life suffered equally devastating consequences. His wife, unable to bear the constant shame and social isolation that came with being married to an international laughingstock, filed for divorce and moved back to her family's home in another region. His adult children, once proud of their father's military achievements, now struggled with the burden of sharing his infamous name and found themselves explaining or apologizing for his behavior in professional and social situations. Financial ruin followed quickly behind professional and personal destruction. Petrov's forced retirement meant a dramatic reduction in income at a time when his expenses were mounting due to legal fees and the costs associated with his divorce proceedings. The comfortable lifestyle he had maintained through years of military service became impossible to sustain, forcing him to sell his home and move to a modest apartment in a less prestigious part of the city. Meanwhile, Guard James Morrison's life had taken a dramatically different trajectory. His exemplary handling of the confrontation earned him commendation from his superiors and recognition that extended far beyond military circles. The Queen herself had personally acknowledged his service, and he received letters of appreciation from citizens around the world, who had been inspired by his demonstration of duty and professionalism under extraordinary pressure. Morrison's story became a recruiting tool for the British military, showcasing the values and character that the service sought to instill in its members. Speaking engagements and media interviews provided him with additional income and opportunities, while his family basked in the reflected glory of his moment of international recognition. His children could proudly tell their friends that their father was the famous guard who had stood firm against the ranting general. The contrast between the two men's fates served as a powerful lesson about the nature of true strength and character. Petrov's attempt to force recognition through intimidation and bluster had backfired spectacularly, demonstrating that authentic authority cannot be demanded or stolen. It must be earned through consistent demonstration of competence, integrity, and service to others. His desperate need for external validation had ultimately led to the complete destruction of everything he had worked to build. Morrison's quiet dignity and unwavering commitment to duty had achieved everything that Petrov's loud demands could not. Without saying a word or breaking his stance, the guard had commanded the respect and admiration of millions of people worldwide. His strength had been demonstrated through restraint, his authority through service, and his character through consistency under pressure. The incident became a cautionary tale told in military academies and diplomatic training programs around the world. Instructors used the confrontation to illustrate the importance of emotional control, cultural sensitivity, and appropriate behavior in international settings. Petrov's name became associated with failure and poor judgment, while Morrison's became synonymous with professional excellence and military virtue. As years passed, the immediate media attention faded, but the lessons and consequences remained. Petrov lived out his remaining years in relative obscurity, his legacy forever tainted by that fateful morning at Buckingham Palace, when his need for recognition had cost him everything worth having. His story served as a stark reminder that pride unchecked by wisdom and humility often becomes the architect of its own destruction. The Queen's Guard continued their timeless duty, their traditions strengthened rather than weakened by the test they had endured. Morrison eventually retired with honors and distinction, his career enhanced rather than hindered by his moment of global recognition. The contrast between the two men's ultimate fates perfectly illustrated the eternal truth that authentic strength comes from within, expressed through service to something greater than oneself, rather than through demands for external recognition and validation from others.